Hey everyone, this is Nitro. In this video, I thought I would do a video, as promised, on the tier list of 3C skills in Langrisser Mobile. So there's currently only 11 of them, so it should be fairly straightforward to go through. At the end of this video, I will put various clips of the top tier ones that I mentioned in use in both PvP and PvE. Keep in mind, however, that for the top tier list, I can only do clips on characters that I personally have. So, just as a side warning in advance, okay? So, with all that said, I'm going to begin, and since there's only 11 heroes, the coverage should be fairly short, alright? So, to start off will be Cherie. And Cherie's 3C, in my opinion, is quite odd. Right? It gives her 1.6 times damage, which is theoretically one of her highest attacks along with lightning speed, right? But the effect of it is odd in the sense that it has a 5-turn cooldown, and if the attack kills a target, the cooldown is reduced by 4, so it'll have a 1-turn cooldown instead. And if it doesn't kill a target, the enemy is stunned for 1 turn, and that stun can't be dispelled. So for PvE content, you generally want to one-shot targets anyways, right? And in that sense, her regular lightning attack allows her to constantly reuse it, and it has 1.5 times damage. So there's very little reason to get this skill for PvE content, right? In other words, this skill is only good for PvP. But the other problem of this skill is that first, lightning speed gives you a chance to act twice, right? So, if you bring lightning speed instead, lightning speed can theoretically allow you to kill off the target because you can attack, then maybe get another attack chance to act again and strike a second time to finish it off. And similarly, if you choose to bring her Shadow Raid skill, if you have a really well built Cherie using Shadow Raid, she can actually one-shot a lot more characters than you can expect. So the end result is I'm actually not sure this skill is even required even for PvP. So I put her in the good for PvP only section, but I'm honestly not even sure if you even want this skill, to be perfectly frank. Okay, so just something to keep in mind. Right. So that is where Cherie fits in though. So next after Cherie is Chris, and Chris's 3C, be aware that I don't even have it. What I know is it's another attack skill that deals 1.6 times damage again, with melee soldiers attacking. So it's a 2-range skill with melee soldiers participating. And it heals all allies and can dispel debuffs, right? Inherently though, it also allows you to do more damage and take reduced damage. But the problem with this skill is that inherently Chris is not a PvE character. Chris is not a PvP character in the first place, right? She has 3 mobility, she's going to struggle to get into range of enemies in general, so I would flat out just, because of her personal characteristics, I would classify her 3C in the PvE only section. You know? Yes, in Season 1, people did use Chris in their party to provide random buffs to allies, which could be mobility buffs, right? But by this point in time, Chris should not be used in anyone's party. So that's why, due to that, she goes under the PvE only category. Next up is Estelle. And Estelle's 3C is like a team-wide buff, right? It buffs all stats, including mobility +1. Because of that mobility +1 aspect of her buff, even though the buff effect of every component is less than a faction buff, it's something like 12.66% rather than 20% or 30%. The +1 mobility aspect makes it usable for both PvP and PvE. Now, the question is whether she is considered top tier for PvP and PvE, and that one is kind of hard to say. I personally don't consider Estelle an absolute top tier character, so I'm going to put her in the good for PvP and PvE section. But other people who have her built up fully may think otherwise and put her in top tier. So this is one of those things where it's completely opinion based. You know. Moving on. Next up is Geralt and Layla. Geralt and Layla's 3C is actually very, very interesting. It's basically a self buff, kind of similar to, let's say, Leon's Chivalry. It allows the character to act again and move 3 more blocks before an attack. So the effect of the buff does last 2 turns in that it provides either your damage turns into physical or magical damage, and you get 50% of your attack or int added to your other stats to increase the damage further. So basically, Geralt and Layla's 3C allows Geralt and Layla to switch between physical and magical attack depending on the enemy you're facing. Yeah. And it increases the damage further and allows her to act again. As a result of the act again aspect especially, I think that would put Geralt and Layla into the good for PvP and PvE section. Okay. Not top tier once again, because this is not a skill that can get through guard. So the tank would, basically guard against this skill. But it could be a decent choice for people who don't have the 15 top tier characters fully built. Next up is Leon. Leon's 3C needs no real introduction. I did a whole video on it already. I'm of the opinion that Leon's 3C is not top tier, simply because first, he can't ignore guard, and second, the skill usually doesn't actually kill anything. So I'm going to place him under the good for PvP and PvE section. He's usable in PvP and PvE, but I don't consider him a top tier character. Just kind of like Geralt and Layla and Estelle, if you will. What else is there to mention about this one? I mean, there's not much else to say. This is very opinion based, of course, but I don't use Leon in my team, even though I have a 6-star Leon. Long story short. And I'm not convinced that this skill's randomness, which can sometimes win you matches, is worth using for Apex Arena. With that said, if we are talking about World Arena, then the skill becomes top tier for World Arena because of the smaller maps. But you would only want to use him in that case for smaller maps. You don't want to use him for the big Apex Arena style maps. So let's just move on from there. So next up would be Luna, right? And Luna's 3C is absolutely top tier for both PvP and PvE. For PvP, it's top tier because it can't be dispelled, the buff that she gives herself. And second, it's the mobility buff aspect. While it can be dispelled, it allows your team to move so much further, especially if they have move again skills like Strike or Omega with his 2 mobility increasing skill. So that makes it top tier for PvP, long story short. For PvE, the skill is still top tier for clearing like Anarchy fights, auto battling them. Because once again, it provides a mobility buff for your other characters for them to move further. So great in both situations. I've used Luna with Wind God Realm to clear chapter missions as well, and I use it very often for clearing Anarchy fights in auto battling, and it saves me quite a bit of time, like especially Anarchy Nimes. Moving on is Matthew. So Matthew's 3C is very, very interesting. It allows him to create a summon that basically has Sword Dance, Attack Command, and Air Slash. So 3 different skills. This summon though does not have any soldiers. So the use of it in PvE content would clearly be for the Attack Command aspect, right? And then for PvP, it's the fact that you have an extra summon who can Sword Dance, and then Matthew can act again. So this one is fairly biased because it practically requires you to have a Flyer Matthew to take full advantage of. But if you have a Flyer Matthew, I would say it's actually top tier for both PvP and PvE. Yeah. Because a Matthew in that kind of situation, you can Sword Dance to prevent the enemies from healing, and then with this summon, and then after that, you can have your own Matthew, the flyer Matthew, follow up and attack with maybe Air Slash. And if that's still not enough to kill the enemy, a flyer Matthew can potentially have Gale for a 20% chance to act again and strike one more time. So lots of utility with this sort of destruction 3C on Matthew, which actually puts it in top tier. But once again, in order to use it properly, you really do need a flyer Matthew. Otherwise, your Matthew would probably be too slow. Just not enough mobility on the map in general. With that said, although I placed Matthew in top tier, he can also be relegated down to the good for PvP and PvE section, because in some ways you can't really say Matthew is a top tier character. You're relying on a 20% luck chance of Gale activation to guarantee a kill on enemy tanks and so on, and that's kind of awkward. So it's kind of hard to say whether you put him in top tier or good section. Kind of up to you. You know what? I'll move him to the good section, because ultimately I don't think I see very many absolute top tier players use Matthew in their Apex box. One thing I should mention about Matthew though is, just like Leon, he is ridiculous with the summon in World Arena. And the reason for that is because in World Arena, after I think 5 turns or so, everyone gets a damage buff. Everyone on the battlefield gets damage buff, right? That damage buff also applies to summons. So the summon sort of destruction Matthew with the damage buff can do ridiculous amounts of damage with an Air Slash or whatever attack you use on him. So just like Leon, in World Arena, the summon sort of destruction Matthew can dominate, assuming the battle goes on for that long. Alright, so let's move on. Next up is Rachel. And Rachel is kind of interesting here, because in very many ways, Rachel is no longer a top tier PvP character. Not with all the new releases of additional characters, and not with her lack of mobility. Okay? So in some ways, you can say she, just due to her personal aspect, she would only fall under the good for PvP and PvE section. But with that said, I have lost to Rachel's before. So it's not like, even in Langrisser rank, so it's not like she is useless. She can certainly fit into the top tier for PvP and PvE section. The 3C skill of hers is kind of like a Heaven Sanction that applies 5 debuffs on the enemy, which are fixed damage dealing debuffs. So, massive number of debuffs that are annoying to remove, an AoE attack that hits an extended range, so that can make her top tier as a result. So this one is kind of hard to say. It's very opinion based on whether, and situation based. Because once again, Rachel is very, very vulnerable to getting assassinated. But if she can survive and toss out her AoEs and so on, she can be a monster. Let's move on. So, we now are up to Sonya, and Sonya's 3C I also have already done a video on, and I would classify her skill as good for PvP only. The reason for that is because she herself, the reason for this is because of the cooldown on the 3C skill. Okay. The 3C skill's cooldown is extremely long, 5 turns to cool down, and in that sense, when you're doing PvE content, once again, you're all about one-shotting enemies in general. So you're generally better off using a skill like Assault that has a 2-turn cooldown, rather than a skill that has a 5-turn cooldown, right? It's only in PvP where you want to one-shot enemies where her 3C Chaotic Spiral becomes absolutely amazing. So, due to that, she goes into the good for PvP only section. Okay, let's move on. Next up is Sumere. She's actually a character I really don't know much about. In fact, I have not encountered any Sumeres in this season thus far. So it's hard for me to judge her 3C, but I would assume that it's well worth bringing, and that puts her into the good for PvP and PvE category, because as long as you have her. You know, this skill basically activates her ability to guard allies, and it allows her units to have 2 range, right? She herself normally has a normal attack range of 2 due to her talent, right? Her 3C skill increases the soldier's range to 2 as well, so that they can assist in any kind of combat. So that's why I would say Sumere falls, well, under the good category. This, once again, is kind of opinion based, because you know, some people consider Sumere a top tier character for PvP. So this is one of those things that's kind of hard to say. Actually, sorry, let me move her down to the good for PvP only category, because I still don't think she's considered top tier tank in general. You know, an AoE attack tank, it's kind of awkward. At least that's my feeling about it. And then finally, we've reached Wyler. So Wyler's 3C has also been covered pretty extensively in my video on his 3C. And long story short, he very much falls under the good for PvE, good for PvP only category. You can just check that video for information about Wyler in general. But the main reason why he would only fall under the good for PvP only category is because there's just a whole bunch of other healers that are superior to him for PvE content. Tierlist, Sophia, Liana, all of them are much, in my opinion, much better for PvE than Wyler would be. And especially since Wyler's strategic gamble would only last for 3 turns out of, you know, however long the whole fight would take. Given that this skill also has a 15-turn cooldown, you can only use it once in the battle, more or less. So you're better off using someone like Tierlist, whose healing light can be applied on all characters endlessly for the whole fight. Okay. So this would be my personal classification of the 3 Cs that are currently available based on, you know, the character's utility as well as the effects of the 3C. You know, once again, I mean, some of these are kind of shiftable. You know, Estelle can very much go onto the top list. Same with Matthew. Those 2 in particular can be shifted, but I think mostly this is more or less accurate. If you want to see an example of it being used in PvE content, you can actually check my Act 2 Chapter 10 video, which was pretty recently released, where basically Luna's Wind God Realm allowed Leon to attack and retreat pretty extreme distances due to the +2 mobility it provides when characters are within 2 blocks of Luna. So that would be a great PvE example. Do you need Luna for PvE content? Absolutely not, but it certainly makes clears easier and faster. Okay. Another example of Luna being used in PvE content would be for the Aniki fights, especially auto-battling Anikis, because that way you can actually save quite a lot of time. So as a quick example, I'm just going to do one auto battle with Luna, and I'm just going to create a fight for Nimes as the example. Alright, so someone has joined, and I'm going to begin the battle, and this clear really just relies on my 3 characters. Leon with Chivalry and Assault, Luna with Wind God Realm, Move Again and Raging Thunder, and then Alte Muller who brings a faction buff. So let's just begin. I purposely put Phallic Soldiers on my Alte Muller in this case because I don't actually want him to be in the fight. So Leon wipes out 1 Undead Knight quickly. Luna activates Wind God Realm and then kills off the enemy Holy General. And then they get faction buffed by my ultimate. And then next up is the Leon from my ally who kills off the other Undead Knight. Now what's a little bit awkward here is normally the enemies attack my Luna and get wiped out. But instead here, Legend Kings' Leon gets killed. It's okay though. Because my Leon can charge forward, wipe out that Undead Knight. And then Luna and Ultimolar advance. So now, Leon moves up, wipes out the first Holy General. Luna wipes out the second Holy General. And that was really weird. Normally, Leon stays next to Luna. I'm not sure why Leon retreated that far back in this situation. But yeah, that will delay this clear a little bit, since everyone ran back instead of pushing forward. But regardless, with this, battle should be over relatively soon, as my characters charge into the enemy base now. There we go. So now it's just wiping out Nimes himself. It should just take 1 or 2 attacks and done. As for Luna being used in PvP, especially Apex Arena, I'm not going to create another video on this, and instead I recommend that you check out my Interesting Apex Matches Season 3, Part 4 and Part 5 videos. Part 4 has the first video where I used Luna to amazing effect, especially when my opponent had his Leonhard use Fusion Dark Emperor Sword on my Luna, which actually made Wind God Realm last 2 turns. Part 5's video, after the first battle, the second, third, and fourth battle all had me use Luna, and in all 3 battles I used Wind God Realm. So those 3 battles as well show different demonstrations of Luna in action, especially the 4th battle in Part 5, where I actually had Luna bring both Wind God Realm and Wind Spiral to maximize her mobility for attacking the enemy. So, I mean, since there's so many examples of Luna in PvP already that I've already created, I'm not going to do a sample video of that, and I'll just refer you to those other videos instead. So, in this particular video, I am going to demonstrate Matthew's 3C or Sword of Destruction summon of a second Matthew. So this particular battle takes place in World Arena rather than Apex Arena. In Apex Arena, it's generally very, very luck-based on when your Matthew can win you matches with Sword of Destruction. As an example, I had a match where my opponents had Sword of Destruction Matthew launch out the Sword Dance to prevent my juggler from healing. Then his main Matthew attacked me, and the first attack was able to, he got 2 attacks in because his Gale triggered. So he first attacked, damaged my juggler till she was nearly dead, Gale activated, and he was able to get in a second attack to finish off my juggler. But that's a pretty rare kind of situation where, you know, he basically gets off 2 attacks plus a Sword Dance to wipe you out. Here, the situation is I have Landius, Liana, and Luna on the left. My opponent has Liana, Matthew, and Landius, and he has 2 summons, as you see, one Sky Archer, and one is his main Matthew. with the Sword of Destruction Matthew, of course. So this situation came about because, well, his Matthew actually has Aeolus's battle armor, and early on I had tried to assassinate that Matthew. Aeolus's battle armor kicked in, and my assassin was unable to one-shot this Matthew. And as a result, because I couldn't one-shot him, I couldn't retreat my assassin, and he was able to take out my assassin, making it a 3v3. So, but at this point, it's going to be turn 5, when everyone gets their buff where they ignore all enemy defense, allowing them to do massive damage. So let's begin the battle here. Turn 5, everyone starts getting the buff that I just mentioned. And I start things off with having Landius reactivating his faction buff. My opponent does the same thing with his Matthew. Next, he sword dances me, doing massive damage. I now retreat my Luna, and this ended up being a mistake because Landius was able to charge forward and attack my Luna. I should have retreated her one tile further back. Nonetheless, it is what it is. I tried to have Liana heal up my characters, and the enemy moves forward with his summon and uses Liana to heal up his Matthew to full. I had no idea what to do here, so I have my Landius attack the enemy Landius, killing him, but taking a lot of damage. And now, with the Sword of Destruction Matthew, he air slashes and kills off my Landius. Then Matthew attacks again for a second time, and the second attack finishes off Landius one more time, turning it into a 2v1 where it's all but over. So with that, battle is done. I have lost, and it was in large part due to the Sword of Destruction Matthew. Next up would be to demonstrate Rachel being used for her 3C in PvE content. And my most common use of her for PvE content would be in regular arena, where I auto battle, so, although I sometimes manual these matches. I'll probably find one that I manually fought that might be better. And the only reason for me to manually fight it is to specifically have Listel target certain characters. Like in this case, I want her to target the enemy. What's her name? Oh my gosh. Completely forgot her name. Healer, Chloe. So I had her Mind Bore, then I move up and have Listel Blood Dance to specifically hit Chloe. Right? Then after that, the other two just move up. One, Rachel uses Runic Void to do AoE damage to the enemies, and then Bozel follows up with an Earthquake attack to do more damage. So it's basically a battle scenario where I hit the enemies with 4 separate AoE attacks. 1 from Rachel, 1 from Bozel, and 2 from Listel. But it works quite well. And finally, to talk about Rachel in PvP content, like Apex Arena, it's the 3C is interesting, okay? I lost this match against Manson, and the thing about this match is, if I just skip right into the battle and pause it, in this match that I lost, where Rachel played a big role, you can view the full battle in the interesting Apex matches of Season 3, Part 5. But this particular match had Rachel not choose to bring her 3C. Okay. So instead, this Rachel brought Arcane Blast, Dark Reaper, and Gospel. And it makes quite a lot of sense because I had Listel, right? Gospel provides that immunity against Listel's debuffs, which can be huge for this battle. So that's why Rachel chose not to bring her 3C, because it's too expensive. If she chose to replace Arcane Blast with 3C, then she wouldn't be able to bring Dark Reaper, and she'd be forced to probably bring Lightning Strike, which, while a good skill, doesn't allow Rachel to exactly heal up to full health after the combat. So in that sense, you can see that Rachel does not always choose to bring her 3C for Apex Arena. I would generally say, in all honesty, that for Apex Arena, bringing Gospel, Arcane Blast, and Dark Reaper is generally a superior combo, but there may be battles where you do want her 3C. In particular, for example, it would be battles where you don't actually need the Gospel skill. So, for example, you might choose to bring, and those are battles where, let's say, you have Landius to faction buff up Rachel, and the enemy doesn't have any real debuffers. So in that situation, rather than bringing Gospel, you would probably choose to replace it with probably bringing her 3C for an AoE attack, and then the last two skills could be either Arcane Blast with Lightning Strike or Dark Reaper with Lightning Strike, or even maybe replacing that 1-point skill with Meditation for extra stats on Rachel. So there are various skill combos you can bring when you don't need Gospel, but once again, 90% of the time, I would say this skill combo with Gospel would be superior to bringing her 3C. And in terms of finding a match where the 3C is actually used, unfortunately, I actually couldn't find one. It's because I personally don't use Rachel myself, and my opponents rarely have Rachel make the difference in a battle. So very often, I mean, that's not to say I don't face off against Rachels, but more often than not, I win the matches where my opponent used Rachel. So this concludes this video on the currently available 3C skills in April 2020. Now, when there's more 3Cs released, I'll probably do updates regarding the new 3Cs. So thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you found this video useful to you. And on that note, Nitro out.